as we head towards celebrating 25 years of the biggest victories that Indian forces achieved, that our generation has seen, which is the Kargil war, I am joined by one of the prime witnesses of that war. Someone who was there for more than 2 months.
A little over 2 months.
A little over 2 months. The war lasted 2 months, but Gaurav was there for more than 2 months. So Gaurav, I want to know, why were you there for more than 2 months? I mean, the war started and finished within 2 months. So what is your timeline?
So, before the conflict started in the summer of 1999 in Kargil, there was massive shelling by Pakistan. And in early May, we'd started losing some patrols. For example, one in Kaksar, which is en route Kargil, and another in Batalik. So this is one of the most inhospitable terrains in our country, in Ladakh. This is, usually you cover counter-terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, and I just started covering counter-terrorism. Just the previous month, we traveled to the Siachen Glacier with then Army Chief General Ved Malik, who was the Army Chief and who was there on an inspection. This was April 1999. And in May, there were reports that one patrol has gone missing, another patrol is missing. There was massive shelling that was taking place. On the 9th of May, an ammunition dump, the main ammunition dump of Leh, of Kargil, it exploded. And my editor used to work for the Indian Express newspaper that time. So Mr. Shekhar Gupta, he said there's something that's happening. You just go.
The editors have an act for it. They can...
And he knows defense.
Yeah.
He knows defense really well. So he said, just go see what's happening around, spend a week and come back. So, which is what the impression was at that time. Maybe shelling has increased, so you start reporting on what shelling is like, how civilians are being impacted. So I got there before the war officially started. 26th of May, Operation Vijay was declared. We reached Srinagar before that. You had to get clearances at Sonmarg and at Srinagar, and we managed to get those clearances. We got to Drass. Just as we were getting to Drass, so you cross the Zojila, the Zojila Pass. It's about 10,000 feet plus. The moment you come on the other side, there was massive shelling. Like our vehicle was shelled, and we had to spend the night at the Drass police station because I got to the 56th Brigade or the Kargil, the Drass Brigade that time, but then they were fighting a war. They couldn't cater to journalists or host you. And there was no hotel. There were no civilians. Everyone had abandoned Drass and gone. So in the dead of the night, it's
at
pitch
that point
dark.
of time, Drass was a really small place. Even now, it's not that big. Although Prime Minister is planning to go there. But you must have been like completely lost when you reached there.
So we could see some guns on the road. Guns as in those cannons, those howitzers. They just started coming in, and it just some of them. And we could see a lot of soldiers there, but those soldiers couldn't even pitch their tents, because wherever they would pitch tents, you would have the Pakistanis shell that place. So जिसको हिंदी में बोलते हैं पहाड़ की ओट लेके, that's where the soldiers were sitting. We managed to get to the police station, and even in the police station, we spent our first night inside the bunker with shelling happening through the night.
And what did your cub reporter Tingling tell you at that point of time? That this is the time I'll be able to get a big story? Like, you must have hit the ground running. But were you excited or were you scared slightly? What was the feeling?
So, we had absolutely no idea where we were, why, what was happening, and who would give us an official version except the station house officer of the Drass police station. Okay. He gave us our first bit of information, and he said it's really bad. And he said the Pakistanis are shelling like crazy. The next morning we went back to the Drass brigade, and I met the brigade commander, I met the deputy commander. They were very kind. They gave me something to eat, since you and I...
They give you information?
You and I come from an army background. So, that helps, right?
Yeah,
so
it
helps break the ice. And they did give some information. The first bit of information was, go back to Srinagar and ask the army. Don't bother us here, and this is tough. But the thing is, once you break the ice and when you break bread, then they start giving bits and pieces of information, and bits of pieces of information indicated things were not good.
No, but what did you feel? Did you feel scared or you were excited? I want to know a reporter's heart.
Scared, but very excited. because I knew I had a big story.
story.
I knew I had a big story, and
The biggest story.
but I didn't know how to get it across
Yes.
because PCOs were not working. PCOs were abandoned in
You
Drass.
obviously wouldn't have got a satellite phone with you
Not
at that time
that-
because you weren't anticipating.
Absolutely, and there were no satellite phones that time. They came in during the conflict, but that time we didn't have any satellite phones. So when I got all the information, then we drove to Kargil. Kargil was the big town, which was about 2 hours away from Drass.
Yes.
So we drove to Kargil, and that's where the PCOs had long queues because everyone was wanting to call home and say either we are okay or civilians wanting to get out of there. So then you use the reporter's trick to get your story across. You find out where is the BSNL or the BSNL equivalent that time, where is their office, and we went there, and there we met the local people, paid some money and got access to one phone line dedicated in a way because we just gave him some money, he got us some food, and we were able to just call up our office and give the entire story of what was happening.
Well, all that effort, and you managed to be there for some very, very key moments. So, if I would ask you to just like quickly list out, and we'll go through the timeline now in detail later. But what were the key moments where when you were there and you witnessed them?
So the first thing I remember was people abandoning Drass town, civilians coming to Kargil, Kargil being shelled by Pakistanis. There was a road that went to Kargil which was directly in sight of the Pakistani army across the LC and also their intruders who had come into our territory. So the Pakistanis, which we did not know that time, had come in between 10 kilometers and 18 kilometers inside our territory across a belt of 150 kilometers, which we didn't know that time. They had come in across 150 kilometers and that's huge, right? And they'd infiltrated and we were all, by the way, my editor that time at the Indian Express was the source in a way of this entire Lahore, bus yatra that Vajpayee undertook.
Yes.
Because Shekhar Gupta had travelled to Lahore, interviewed Nawaz Sharif. Incidentally, I had transcribed that entire footage, as a young reporter, and he wanted somebody, I believe, who he could trust that information will not come out that time until that story is published. So I was called to his office and I was given that dictaphone and said, you will sit in a separate room, and I transcribed that entire conversation between Nawaz Sharif and Shekhar Gupta, and including ki kab chai aayi or kitni cheeni dali, आप कितनी चीज शक्कर लेंगे टाइप्स, एंड वो उसको चाय को स्टर कर रहे हैं और क्या कॉन्वर्सेशन हो रहा है कि जी वाजपेयी बस में भी बैठकर आ जाएं और हम वापस जाके सारा कश्मीर सुलझा लेंगे. एंड द वर्क्स दैट इंटरव्यू वाज पब्लिश्ड एट इन द इंडियन एक्सप्रेस व्हिच लेड टू वाजपेयी देन गोइंग टू लाहौर. I'm sure there were a lot of back channel but before that, but this was the front of that back channel that this article appeared, and then Vajpayee went. So India was basking in that glory ki Lahore bus mein gaye hain. It's a new chapter of India-Pakistan friendship and the works, and then the Pakistanis were intruding into Kargil.
Yeah.
So they were stabbing us in the back, and Drass abandoned, Kargil abandoned, phones not working. Imagine thousands of people with nowhere to stay, with their cattle, with little children, staying out in the open and biting cold. Remember, Drass in winters is the second coldest inhabited place in the world. -60 is what they claim. I've seen -30 there in winters when I reported subsequently. But even in summers, it was, -3, -4, -5 in the early days of the war. So they went to places like Sanku and Minji, those little villages outside the firing line area. But the brigade headquarters, that was still in the line of Pakistani fire. And we went to the brigade headquarters. I interviewed Brigadier Surinder Singh, who was then the Kargil brigade commander. I interviewed several other officers there. Then bits and pieces of information started coming in, because wherever a patrol would go up, that patrol would come in the line of fire. Remember, in Delhi, everyone was saying they're mujahideen, they're terrorists. Terrorists have infiltrated. We'll kill them in 48 hours. The RM, then Raksha Mantri George Fernandes, issued a statement on the basis of what the army had told him, which means the army brass didn't know what was happening.
Yeah, it was, India was taken by surprise, but you managed to embed yourself there somehow. This is not a term we use in India, but actually the way you told me about it, you were moving around with the key platoons, with the key soldiers who were doing the main operations at that time. How did that happen, and where all were you, let's say, for the lack of better word, embedded, and where were you?
So there wasn't an official, embedding of
Yes.
journalists with the army, but there was no other alternative. For Drass, for example, you could see the war at the roadhead. The guns that came in subsequently, they were on the roadhead itself. The battalions had pitched their tents on either side of the road, and there was no place to eat. So what would you do? You would take a taxi from Kargil to Drass, get to Drass, get scraps of information, literally scraps of information, and then you'd be hungry. What do you do? So again, since you've grown up, you and I have grown up in an army environment, right? So you head to the langar, right? So you get to the langar for two things. You get the langar gup and you get food. So, and we would get both. Now, again, since you've been born in an army environment, you recognize ranks. You know who is
to talk to.
You know who to talk to, you know what to say to whom. So, for example, I knew who the CHM was, which other journalists wouldn't know who were there, or I would know who the mess havaldar is, and you know why mess havaldar is so important in life. So, while they would be heading to the commanding officer, and the commanding officer would fob them off if he had to, or the brigade commander, I would go to the CHM, I would go to the mess havaldar, I would go to the subedar major, and get stuff get information from them, and food. And then I was very lucky. So now it's 25 years, so I can say it. So for example, before the Tololing operation happened, 18 Grenadiers and 2 Rajrif are 2 battalions that were in the thick of this action, right? The commanding officer of 18 Grenadiers was an officer called Colonel Kushal Thakur. Later he retired as Brigadier Kushal Thakur. So he was very kind to me. I mean, he said, "You're an army kid." He knew my dad. So he was very, very kind to me. He called me to his location. He gave me food. And his young officers gave me a lot of information about the operations that they were undertaking. And they'd had several setbacks. He lost his 2IC in an operation. He lost 2 other officers in an operation, and brave officers. So I would get to know what was happening. So I wouldn't give their names, but I would give details of operations. And then my reports started going viral in the Indian Express. Again, Shekhar Gupta was very kind. He put everything on the front page.
It was front page news. I mean, there was hardly any information coming in, and if you were there and sending whatever bits and scraps of information you could gather, and I mean, people sitting in Delhi, because we were reading it in the papers only, it was huge.
It was. And so, for example, I met late Colonel M.B. Rabindranath. He was commanding 2 Rajrif that time, and he was again very kind to me. All the other journalists were at the entrance, at his office, because the mess havaldar, for some reason, I had spoken to him earlier. He took me straight to the mess.
He took you in with the chai.
No, and I was sitting
chai
and Gaurav Sawant. No, so he took me to the mess. And he gave me something to eat, and that's when these officers also came in to eat. And he said, "Yeah, हमारा वो Brigadier Sawant का बेटा है." Or he says, "हाँ, मैं तुम्हारी report पढ़ रहा था." And then we got talking, and gradually the trust built, because no names would come out. Whatever they were lacking, I was able to project that. And that time these soldiers had been pushed up with virtually nothing. Some of them went for operations; they didn't have winter clothing.
Yes.
And this is a place where you required high altitude clothing.
Yes.
You required ECC. Now, while you had ECC for Siachen, extreme, cold climate clothing, you had them for Siachen. Siachen, you had them from 1984, right?
Yes.
Op Meghdoot. But here, even in 1999, logistics initially couldn't provide them. So these guys were wearing regular shoes and climbing snow-clad mountains. It was absolutely bizarre.
The regular DMSs?
Either DMSs or the jungle boots.
Oh my God.
Jungle boots and snow. And I would take pictures, and how do you send those pictures? So it was purely trust. Any vehicle going down to Srinagar in an envelope, I would
just give it.
Yeah, give that entire tape, that reel to them, and say, "Ye le jana." My office in Srinagar would collect it, develop it, and send it to Delhi. That's how I was able to send my dispatches.
Here you told me that there were some key dates that you mentioned for me. I will skip a few because you told me about the shelling and everything. But what was the first conflict or first important incident that registers in your mind as, okay, this was something big that happened and you were in a haste that ye to pahunchana hai?
So 27th of May, I was in Drass. The information had come in from Batalik that Flight Lieutenant Nachiketa's MiG-27 had engine trouble. It flamed out and it did not reignite. So he had to eject, and he was taken prisoner of war. So, and much later I found out. Of course, we knew 2 planes had gone down. So the second plane that went down was squad leader Ajay Ahuja. He was his senior officer. They were on different missions. So when the MiG-27 engine flameout took place and he ejected, Ahuja wanted to check where is he landing so that the rescue helicopter could be sent. And we didn't know, or even the Indian Air Force didn't know whether they're landing on the Indian side or in POK. So anyway, he risked his life. He encircled that place. He went back, and then he went down to see, where this parachute was landing. That's the time the Pakistanis, who had Stingers or whatever surface-to-air missiles they were using at that point of time, they fired a SAM and hit his MiG-21. So he bailed out. While he was landing, they shot him in cold blood. And we got to know all of this much later. We did get to know that 2 aircraft had gone down. And that froze you. Terrorists don't shoot down planes. Terrorists don't carry Stinger missiles. That was one.
Also, when you, no matter which country's army it is, you always associate a sort of a respect for the other uniform also.
Absolutely.
So killing an officer is a huge deal for any other army officer also, no matter which army you're from.
Except if they're Pakistanis, because they were
Which
doing
is
this,
surprising,
which was bizarre.
That is why I'm saying it's surprising they could do something like that.
And the next day, so while you're just digesting this bit of information, this was 27th May, 28th May, 3 helicopters went into Drass sector, Tololing. Tololing was a very prominent feature from where the Pakistanis were dominating even our brigade headquarters. It's like, you're sitting on where you and I are sitting, and you just look on top of a mountain, and on top of the hill, the Pakistanis are sitting. That they were that close. So, by the way, I've climbed Tololing much later, and it's a 7-hour climb for somebody like me in a purely, a peaceful environment. When the Indian Army is on top, it took me 7 hours to climb. Imagine how tough it would have been for our soldiers of 2 Raj Rifle and 18 Grenadiers and the others to climb in the line of enemy fire. And I'll tell you that story also, because I still get goosebumps thinking about that, because I could hear the conversation on wireless. I was at the battalion headquarters. They were, the information that was coming in. But I'll tell you that in just a moment. I'm telling you about this helicopter. Our Mi-17 goes in. The Pakistanis fire a surface-to-air missile. There are 3 helicopters, 2 have flares, they fire flares and chaffs, and and then the helicopters return, because the Stingers are heat-seeking missile, so they hit the flares and the helicopters return. The 3rd helicopter, which had gone in deepest into the Nala, to survey where the Pakistanis were, to get an idea of the lay of the land, that helicopter did not have flares.
Oh.
So that Stinger came and hit it, and it just went down. Vinko Pundir and his team, and that helicopter went down into the Nala, and we lost 5 people, 5 of our braves. This was just the, May 28th, and that, we were in Drass when this information came in. It was impossible to retrieve their mortal remains from the Nala, because the Pakistanis were on top, and that was absolutely bizarre. That evening when I went back to the brigade headquarters, I was told to leave.
Yeah, the morale would have been, back to back, absolutely. 2 days of loss.
And this was
Human loss.
And this was at one level. Our losses of the army were equally big, because every patrol that was going up was being attacked. So, on a mountain, you just can't climb from anywhere. You take one spur, you take another axis. It's the Pakistan army, so they know where the Indian army would climb from, and they had their machine guns placed strategically. So, 1, to neutralize them. 2, they would just hurl stones, and our soldiers climbing would just be hit by those stones. So, it was that bad in the early days of the war. And any battalion I would go to, whether I would go to 2 Raj Rifle or 18 Grenadiers or the Nagas or the others who were there, or the RT guys, and again, I learned so much about artillery. Jal Sundarji had a very good story which I've learned. When all the journalists were writing about Bofors and the scandal around Bofors, he told my editor that these journalists who are writing so much about Bofors, they don't even know the difference between a bore and a caliber, except that they're big bores of low caliber. And I also learned the difference between a bore and a caliber only during Kargil war.
I don't know the difference between a bore and a caliber.
and
It's
so-
just the difference of bore. I always thought is the muzzle
Absolutely.
weight, and caliber is
the
ammunition.
You've hit the nail on its head. So you're a brat, so you would know. So so 52 caliber. So we've upgraded our Bofors, right, from the
Yes.
Kargil war. We had 39 caliber that time. I learned so much about artillery because I would be virtually living with these gunners, right?
And they're
So-
all very stylish lot, I must say, the artillery.
and they
men.
love to talk. They love to, best thing about Forge wants to give gyan, right? There has to be somebody ready to take it, and I wanted all that gyan. So if I knew I knew what was heer. Hum log to heer ranjha. For us, heer would be a very pretty girl, but heer is a high explosive which has extended range, which can go and hit at a longer. So it was a heer round lao. So heer round doesn't mean a very pretty girl will walk in it. There's a bigger, a round of ammo with a different charge that's coming in, or the number of bomblets inside that bomb. And that's confidential information. But I knew the number of bomblets inside, the round that army was firing in that area. And that is only because I'm sitting with them, I'm staying with them, breakfast, lunch, dinner, everything with these guys. I wouldn't even step out. I wouldn't even go back to file my report to Kargil. I sent my vehicle back. And whichever battalion would give me food, I would stay with them.
There was always I'm sure, a fear of the fact that if you once go out, whether you will be able to come back or not.
Absolutely.
Whether you never know in a situation like that. But tell me one thing. You told me about the back-to-back losses. Obviously, that would have led to a lot of, loss of morale as well. But then, how did we see the first victory? How did you witness it? And did it bring about any change in the situation there?
That's a brilliant question. Absolutely, I did. So, when every initial operation led to a setback, army reassessed, they recalibrated, because too many body bags coming down is very bad for the nation, and it's not good for the army either. And nobody wanted to take rush. Initially, there was panic. When you overcame that panic, there were cold, calculated decisions that were taken. So, the army decided to bring in more heavy guns, the 155mm howitzers, the 130mm anti-tank guns, firing in direct firing mode, the Indian field gun 105mm, more mortars came in, more ammunition came in, and this is something that people have only heard of. I've had gunner officers tell me that this generation of gunner officers, that they have never seen this. I can so proudly say I have seen 100 guns fire together. There's a 100 gun concept. I saw it being validated in front of my eyes in Kargil. 100 guns, from a 155mm howitzer to a 130mm anti-tank gun to a field gun, all firing together at one peak.
It's hard to imagine in a terrain like that, 100 guns lined up.
Over 30 kilometers. एक इधर एक उसकी साइटिंग करना, इमेजिन उसकी साइटिंग करना, उसका लोकेशन करना, उसको वहां रखना. और पाकिस्तान had weapon locating radars, which unfortunately India did not. And that's a big question for our policy planners. If the army needs something, please give it to them. They don't want it for style, they want it to save lives. So so you fire a gun once, twice, thrice. The weapon locating radar that the enemy has, he'll correlate where that weapon is and he'll fire back. There's an instant CB, counter bombardment, and that CB would hit your gun, and there's losses of crores in that. So and these were not while Bofors is fire and forget. Here they were dug in. I've seen Bofors.
Okay, so they can't be moved.
They can't be moved in a hurry.
Because a lot of time, that's what artillery does. Shoots and then changes the position.
You shoot and scoot, but not every Bofors is shoot and scoot. So, it was one logistics nightmare, operational nightmare, and the Pakistanis are bloody sitting on top, and so they're watching you. They have naked eye vision. So their OP officers, their observation post officers, their OP officers are directing their fire. And then, so I saw, then the army took a pause. They said, "ठीक है, ये हो रहा है." fight Air Force, after 2 planes were shot down, they modified their tactics. They started flying higher and they started using precision guided munition, PGMs that were brought in from Israel. And a lot of rejigging took place, lots of jugaad took place, and that's where our Air Force is really good at jugaad. The army brought in their guns, 100 guns brought in. There was a lull of 12 June ki raat. That area was sanitized. All journalists, incidentally, who were camping there, most of them were sent back to Srinagar. So, since I wasn't in Kargil, I wasn't in one of the hotels, all journalists, they were packed in buses and sent back to Srinagar. We were 4-5 of us who managed to survive, क्योंकि कोई बटालिक में था, कोई द्रास में था, कोई यहाँ था, कोई वहाँ था. जो नहीं थे वहाँ पर, वो बच गए. You know,
the headquarter did not know about you.
They knew, but they didn't know where to find us. So, for example, you know, there was Hema Shukla. She used to report for the Associated Press. Very brave girl. So, Hema Shukla was one of them from AP. You know, you had Nilesh Mishra, who now does that radio
Slow
thingy.
interview.
Yeah, so he was there, Sankarshan Thakur and I. So we were also traveling in a group. In numbers, there's strength, right? You would also pool in money for your taxi and this and that. So we managed to survive because we were in Drass at various locations. 12 जून की रात 100 तोपें अंधेरा होने के बाद, so घुप अंधेरा, no light, no street light, no civilian, no nothing, घुप अंधेरा, high altitude, 10,000 feet की ऊंचाई, द्रास में, हाड़ कपाने वाली सर्दी और पूरा सन्नाटा. And suddenly, boom, 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 100 guns boom together, non-stop, through the night. While these guns are booming, the army starts advancing. And so we'd spent one part of the evening, we were with the gunners, and then I knew about 2 Rajrif, so I went to 2 Rajrif, and there Major Vivek Gupta, who made the supreme sacrifice of his life and got a Mahavir Chakra posthumously. उन्होंने जाने से पहले बोला था कि गुप्ता आज या तो तोलोलिंग पे तिरंगा फहराएगा या फिर तिरंगे में लिपट कर आएगा. Because it was a suicide mission. It was do or die. When I climbed to Tololing 10 years later, right? 10 years of Kargil, that's when we were permitted to climb. We died climbing and reaching that area. इतनी high altitude में sickness, ये वो acclimatization भी नहीं, और किसी तरह सोचो वो तो in the line of fire, in the hail of enemy bullets, they were climbing, and yet they managed to get on top, hurling grenades, firing, and they managed to get a toehold, and that toehold was so important. That gave us our first victory, and I'm so proud that, you know, the moment that happened, I managed to get that information to Delhi. 13th June, India's first victory in Kargil. Tololing jeet liya.
And you know, that information reaching the masses is also important.
It was
because
huge.
it would have led to such a wave of relief amongst the masses as well.
Because Army in Delhi hadn't given out that information. Army was cross-checking everything. And in fact, then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he'd come to Kargil, and Farooq Abdullah was then Chief Minister. He was with him. A lot of other people were there. General Ved Malik was the Army Chief. So General Ved Malik told the Prime Minister, वो Kargil helipad पे हम लोग खड़े थे कि ये गौरव सावंत की ही स्टोरी थी, वो but ये ना कई बार बहुत शैतानी भी करता है. So the Prime Minister said, आप शैतानी ना करें, आप अच्छी खबरें लिखें, क्योंकि देश का मनोबल इम्पैक्ट होता है.
इससे अच्छी खबर क्या हो सकती थी? That you gave the country the news of the first victory, and I'm sure that would have really led to, you know, a lot of common people thinking, oh, now something is going to happen. So this could have turned the course of the war, and
so this was just the first victory, and in one peak. Remember, the Pakistanis were
but a victory which almost looked impossible, and
it was mission impossible.
So we managed to get it. That means we were capable of much more.
So when the artillery came in, when the aircraft came in, when additional infantry battalions came in, when multiple direction operations were mounted, that's when this happened. And then one officer who later became Army Commander Northern Command, Lieutenant General Y.K. Joshi, he was then officiating CO of 13 Jackraff. and 13 Jackrif was given the next task because 18 Grenadiers was tired, 2 Rajrif was tired. They'd done multiple operations and they had massive casualties. Unfortunately, both fatalities and other non-fatal casualties. So 13 Jackrif was brought in, and the next post was 5140. Equally important, if not more, because then you wanted that entire mountain in your kabza, right? It's your own territory, 20 kilometers inside your territory, and the Pakistanis were sitting there. So this was his task. I met him ittifaq se. You know, I was sitting with CO 18 Grenadiers, and वहीं से ये मश्को वैली की तरफ इनकी फौज जा रही थी. Mashko Valley is a beautiful valley. I've been to Switzerland, you know, and this is more beautiful than Switzerland. It doesn't have those, you know,
the aspen trees.
Yeah, but it's so beautiful. वो जो झरने का पानी, हम झरने का पानी ऐसे पिया करते थे. इतना साफ था वो झरने का पानी. Himalayan mineral water, absolutely. अच्छा, और वहाँ बहुत इतनी हरियाली. The meadows are so beautiful, the mountains are so beautiful. लेकिन बस वही है कि वहाँ गोलियाँ चलती थी और गोले गिरते थे. तो इत्तेफाक से इनसे लेफ्टिनेंट कर्नल वाई के जोशी से मुलाकात हुई. तो अगला ऑपरेशन उन्हीं का हो रहा था. तो अब once you know they realize that, and they're also reading your reports because next day hundreds of copies of Indian Express were coming and were being distributed to
He must
battalions.
be thinking, I better watch out what I say in front of this boy.
But for some reason he trusted me, and I feel so privileged. Even when he became Army Commander, Northern Command, and when Galwan happened, and all through, I kept in touch with them, and they continued to talk to me throughout. There were operations that were being planned in front of me. कि कल ये operation होने वाला है. As a journalist, I'd be very tempted कि story कर दो, but you would never do those stories.
But as a countryman, you know, and as a sane person, you know that this is...
this information will benefit the enemy.
Yeah.
And I mean, वो जो जैसे, just as an aside, when Saurabh Kalia, Lieutenant Saurabh Kalia and the 5 soldiers of 4 Jat, when their mortal remains were returned, so 0 point से return किया, कारगिल की hospital में उनका postmortem हुआ. तो उस पोस्टमार्टम में किस तरह से उनको यातना दी थी, you know, they were tortured, आंखें निकाल ली, शरीर जलाया गया, अंग तोड़ा गया, वो सब जो पोस्टमार्टम रिपोर्ट में अंकित है वो बातें, all of that, one of the persons who carried out the postmortem, we'd spoken to him off the record completely. He told us about it. So even before that information became public, I knew it. I sent it to my editor. They didn't publish it initially. They said, we'll verify it. You know, because I am, for me it's langar gup, right? I'm hearing it from people who are not authorized to give me information.
But it is also highly inflammatory because
And
emotions would run high when
absolutely
information like this comes out.
But when this information came out, my report in its entirety, with its date, was published by the editor of my newspaper that time. And then when 5140 happened and Vikram Batra and you know, ye Dil Mange More and the multi-pronged offensive that was mounted on that post, my interaction with all these officers and their braves, all of that, like Vikram Batra, by then incidentally I had a satellite phone.
Finally,
how it reached me is again an amazing story.
People of this generation will not realize how difficult it was to get information.
To communicate, absolutely. So there were no mobile phones there. Nothing would work, and a satellite phone would, you know, it would go straight to the satellite and then to our
and
our
the
office.
cost of it used to be
Amazing.
So the offices used to be like, use it only if you really need it.
Except that I didn't care. I mean, one, I was very young. And 2, if my office is paying, not this office, that office. So I would give my phone to everybody in
All
the army,
officers.
officers, JCOs, jawans, to talk to their families.
कर लो भाई, फोन कर लो.
फोन करो, क्योंकि जब वो फोन पर अपनी बीवी बच्चों से बात कर रहे हैं ना, तो मुझे तो जानकारी भी मिल रही है. Not that I wanted that जानकारी, but that got me so much goodwill that people would seek me out. उससे पहले तो I would seek entry to a battalion, right? Once I had a satellite phone and they knew वो Indian Express का लड़का है ना, उसके पास satellite phone है, and I needed a place to charge that phone. तो मेरे पास खाना हो ना हो, कपड़े हो ना हो, मैं बस अपना फोन और चार्जर अपने साथ लेकर चलता था, और मैं कहीं से अपना इंफॉर्मेशन अपने दफ्तर दे रहा था ना, तो एक कोई, you know, military intelligence guys are always in CVs in a civil vehicle with press written on it. So, and they would come and say, आप गौरव सावंत है? हाँ. आपको सीओ साहब बुला रहे हैं. अब कौन पलटन क्या सीओ, I would have absolutely no idea. And then I would be taken to some battalion that was there, and the CEO would say, come have a cup of coffee, you want to charge your phone? And I say yes. Charge my phone. They would use it. And you know, again, something that I love about the army that you would know as well, it's always the Jawans who call up first, those who are going for an
So
operation.
ESCON and all was not working there.
It wasn't nothing.
ESCON is internal
Internal military,
exchange.
So it was, but imagine if you had so many soldiers, and if it's all being prioritized, and here there's an additional asset that they have, and all they need to do is, you know, give the charging point. Generator से ही charge होता है, कोई बिजली तो आ नहीं रही. Or I would get food, I would get.
So these were more personal calls, of course, because
it was all 100% personal.
Calls. Yeah,
And they would make sure, and they knew it's very expensive. So they say, हाँ मैं बिल्कुल ठीक ठाक हूँ. There was one young officer.
Such a relief for the family people.
Absolutely, one young officer who was, you know, who called up his mom. And he became a very dear friend of mine. He's still a very dear friend of mine. And now is a very senior officer in the army. That time was a young Kaptan Saab. Tell his mom, हाँ मैं बिल्कुल ठीक हूँ. आपके लिए कौन सी साड़ी खरीदनी है? मैं बनारस में उस समय. अरे वो साड़ी निकालो.
He hadn't told his
because
mother.
he didn't want his mom to know that he's in Kargil.
I know.
So it's amazing. I mean, those are the kinds of stories that I was filing. One story that I filed, which was father and son and brother in the same battle zone. So, for example, Brigadier Ol was commanding the Drass brigade, and his son Amit Ol was fighting in Drass at the LC. Okay, I reported on 7 such instances, and in one such instance, quite like Saving Private Ryan, when one brother was killed, the army actually killed in action. The army pulled out the second brother, and he refused to be pulled out. So I did that story also. He said, fine, I've lost my blood brother, right? But these 5 guys I'm with here in my section, these 10 guys, they're my brothers, I'm not going.
Yeah.
And he said, I defy the CO. CO said, no, you have to go, it's my instruction. He said, no, sir. These 10 guys, this section are my brothers. So I was able to do those reports which no one else, had that kind of access to.
You saw a side of the war which was very private also. You saw a very private moment which was documented in a film also, and you were, I think, going towards that. How a brave heart called his sweetheart.
Fiancé. Yeah.
So tell us, thanks to this phone only.
Yeah, so Captain Vikram Batra was one of our bravest of our brave, right? Ye Dil Mange More on 5140, and once again dispatched for 4875. So thanks to then Lieutenant Colonel Y.K. Joshi and later Lieutenant General Y.K. Joshi, I met all these guys. So since I had the sat phone, I believe his girlfriend she didn't get married till date. She's not married even now. Or till some years back when I had, when I was in touch with the family and friends. So he wanted to call her. There was this very difficult operation, 4875. Tiger Hill was over. I'll tell you about Tiger Hill subsequently. 4875 was one of the most dominating features, from where the Pakistanis could look that entire road from Gumri all the way to Drass and beyond. Because it was at an altitude of about 17,000 feet and peeping inside, and no other mountain on top, so they could see that entire road. So a Pakistani OP officer sitting there could direct his artillery to target any of our ammunition convoys, troop convoys, resource supplies, anything over that 50-60 kilometer long road. That had to be vacated. We had to take that back, because until that happened, your Tiger Hill victory wouldn't be complete. You won Tiger Hill on the 4th of July till the 7th of July, but this operation was important. All effort done, they needed that last push. Vikram was down with fever. And you need that Josh machine to make that breakthrough. And he was that Josh machine who went for that operation. Before he went for that operation, the only phone that was available was mine. And it was charging there. So he used that phone, spoke to his fiancée or the lady friend, which was very private. So those are conversations I don't know about. I know another private conversation which I'll tell you about.
Private conversation.
And so when that movie Sher Shah was made on Vikram Batra, they've used that bit because when that conversation happened, we said, "Kahan se phone kar rahe ho?" He said, "वो Gaurav Sawant का phone है." So they've used that. "अरे Gaurav अपना phone देना." So they've used that in that movie also. That bit, that conversation. So, when this Tiger Hill operation was being planned, there was this officer. अब वो बात उसका नाम मैंने गलती से छाप दिया था. मतलब I interviewed him. I said
ACR खराब करा दिया आपने.
नहीं. I asked the CEO, said छाप दो. He did a brave operation, तो उसका नाम मैंने छाप दिया. अब उसकी फियांसे को पता चल गया कि वो तो कारगिल में लड़ाई लड़ रहा है. And she refused to marry him. And he said, यार क्या कर दिया तूने? I said, क्यों, क्या हो गया? He said, यार she's saying I don't want to marry a coffin. I said, बताओ यार.
Not to sound judgmental, but you're marrying an army officer. Didn't she know that?
But so all these army officers anyway, he hadn't said that he's in the line of fire and this and that and blah.
He was an infantryman?
Infantry.
Okay.
So
definitely not an army officer's daughter.
so she said, I'm not marrying a coffin. अब इत्तेफाक से मैंने एक रिपोर्ट में वो लिख दिया कि वो थोड़ा ऑपरेशन करके आया है, हम लोग सब सेलिब्रेट कर रहे हैं, एंड वी वर सेलिब्रेटिंग दैट.
You wrote about his breakup?
Yep. I said the lady, I didn't know her name, I still don't know her name, and I said
otherwise you would have gotten couriers of chappals from her.
No, but I didn't mention the state, I didn't mention the city, I didn't mention
No
any information.
identifier, of course.
No identifier. I just mentioned
Just
that
the
while we are
emotion.
all celebrating, the officer who's done such a great operation or he's been a part of such a great operation, he was he was celebrating, but he wasn't celebrating as much because
the Braveheart had a broken heart.
अरे क्या बात है, what a headline यार, what a headline. Braveheart had a broken heart. तो वो मैंने लिख दिया कि उसका सेलिब्रेशन में बस एक डैम्पनर था कि वो his lady friend said कि I don't want to marry a coffin. अब जब ये इंडियन एक्सप्रेस में फ्रंट पेज छप गया तो people put 2 and 2 together and they reached the lady's house and they said, how can you do this? You have to marry him. And anyway, तो उसके बाद क्या हुआ तो एक is a separate story. But this is how I was able to cover this part of Kargil. The other part that I was able to cover was General Ved Malik, then army chief. He came down and he said, "You're creating a lot of trouble for us." And अब कुछ तो हमारी रिपोर्ट्स गड़बड़ भी हो जाती थी क्योंकि लंगर गप में not everything is accurate. और एक बार हमको एक bit of information मिली तो मैंने वो जब दफ्तर भेजी तो he says, यार if you are giving this information, why would Pakistanis need a spy here? You are giving information कि ये gun यहाँ destroyed है. This information should never go out. So Shekhar Gupta ensured that information was not published. But perhaps in that conversation with the army chief or some bit of information, the army chief then told me कि एक बार just run this past your office so that there's no tactical information, strategic or tactical that comes out. So it was baptism by fire. It was a learning process even for us at that point of time.
Of course, and it was a new experience. India had not really seen televised wars or wars that are so heavily reported, and in a terrain which we had, of course, the 62 war and everything, the terrain was similar. But this was a new age war. Everybody could hear everything, everybody could see everything, and understandably, mistakes could be made, but that's another interesting.
And at one point of time, they said, "इसको quarter guard में बंद." One of the brigade commanders.
quarter guard में ये तो हमें बचपन में शैतानी में बोलते थे, quarter guard में बंद कर दो.
और वो डर बचपन का अभी भी था मेरे मन में. So when the brigade commander says, "इसको quarter guard में बंद करो," I beat a hasty retreat.
Quarter guard is like a temporary jail.
It's like a military prison.
Usually just like one room, one room with a man standing outside, but yes, proper salake.
So the moment he said, "इसको quarter guard में ले जाओ और या बंद करो," or words to that effect, मैं मतलब ऐसा पतली गली से वहाँ से कटा ना, और I knew कौन सी battalion थोड़ा out of harm's way है. Next 3 days I stayed with that battalion. So much so that they gave me something to wear that would be very different from the clothes that I was wearing. And I could blend in with them and roam around with them.
That's a good idea. I'll move you on now to the Batalik sector. Okay.
Yeah.
Some story you did which actually, because you were telling us, you were careful about the stories and you were getting a feedback also, and your editor was extremely careful. But stories of war always get politicized. So did you face that also? So
Batalik, and this is a lesson for the army also, Batalik, there were some of the fiercest battles that were fought. Unfortunately, there was only one road leading to Batalik, and army did not give access. So I actually got into a fuel tanker that was going into refuel. And fuel was required. A war, you require fuel all the time. So there were hundreds of fuel tankers going. So this was a suggestion that came in from one of the friendly army guys कि तू fuel tanker में बैठ जा.
Friendly fatigues.
हाँ, कि तू you sit in that vehicle. Civilian vehicles are being checked. Fuel tankers you'll sail through. That's exactly what I did, and I managed to get to the brigade headquarters there. Brigadier Devinder Singh, who was a paratrooper gunner, he was commanding the brigade, but he had made a TAC headquarters, which was again I think a day and a half walk from the road head. And I didn't want to go so deep inside कि वहाँ signal नहीं मिला, कोई problem हो गई, I'm unable to communicate, I'm unable to come back to. So there were 5 of these Aryan villages there, that folklore. Batalik has those 5 original Aryan villages.
I've been to one of them.
You've been to one, the Daha, Garchik and Vyama and all. Garkhun.
Yeah. I've been to Garkhun.
Yeah. So I stayed in that village, and the village headman, he took me with him to a location where you had both 111 GR and Gurkha rifles. They were attacking Jubar from one side, and you had I think 22 grenadiers attacking from the other side. So again your story becomes wherever you get the information from. So I'd spent time with 16 grenadiers in Drass, 18 grenadiers in Drass. They'd passed on the word for me. So 22 grenadiers was.
By the way, all these words that he's using, don't get confused. It's all infantry. Most of it. Either infantry or these are all different phases, smaller sects or sections of Indian Army which work under different departments. Just to make it clear.
So I was with the 22 grenadiers here. And 111 GR was attacking from one flank, 22 GR was 22 grenadiers was attacking from the other flank. And so these guys had a group of Muslim troops also. So every
the Gurkha rifles.
No, the grenadiers. So their Qaim Khani troops, their battle cry was Allahu Akbar. They were so the Indian army in Batalik very cleverly, the Pakistanis had come in. These guys very smartly they moved behind the enemy, went up to the LC and cut off the troops who were inside. So you've cut off their food supply, you've cut off their ammunition supply, you've cut off their water supply, and those troops are stranded there. And they caught a Pakistani soldier alive. And they interrogated him. I got those interrogation details also. So, and I got that picture. So we were able to say, "Arey Pakistani sipahi zinda pakda hai, vardi mein pakda hai, NLI ka banda hai, and you have the Pakistanis who are fighting this war. This is not a war that's being fought by badi mujahideens. These are Pakistan army regulars."
Being involved.
And अच्छा वो अल्लाह अकबर करके जवान चढ़ रहे थे हमारे कायम खानी ग्रेनेडियर्स वाले. जब ग्रेनेडियर्स वाले अल्लाह अकबर करके ऊपर चढ़ रहे थे, पाकिस्तानियों ने सोचा तो अपने बंदे चढ़ रहे हैं. क्योंकि वो पाकिस्तान की साइड से ही चढ़ रहे थे, तो उन्होंने उनकी मदद कर दी ऊपर चढ़ने में. Instead of firing in that direction, they go Allahu Akbar, Nare Takbir.
The cry saved them.
And those guys helped them. जब ऊपर आए उन्होंने बोला अरे ये तो इंडियन आर्मी वाले हैं, लेकिन तब तक ये लोगों ने बहुत हेवी असॉल्ट किया और उनको हरा दिया. और दूसरी तरफ से ये ग्रेनेडियर्स वाले, ये जीआर वाले भी चढ़ रहे थे, 111 जीआर वाले, और जय अयो गुरखाली, जय माँ काली एंड देयर वॉर क्राई एंड गुत्थम गुत्था की लड़ाई. एंड द पाकिस्तानीज वर थ्रोन आउट ऑफ देयर, दे वर किल्ड. एंड द पिक्चर्स आई हैव सीन वर गुत्थम गुत्था की लड़ाई में इन्होंने पहाड़ से उठा उठा के फेंका पाकिस्तानियों को, और 17,000 फीट की ऊंचाई से. सो काफ़ी मर गए, काफ़ी भाग गए या पकड़े गए उस ऑपरेशन में. तो मैंने अगेन दिस वाज लाइक वन ऑफ द फ्रंट पेज बिग हेडलाइंस, बैटल क्राई ऑफ अल्लाह अकबर एंड दे कैप्चर दिस पीक. द जीआर गाइस वर सेइंग यस, मेन ऑपरेशन हमने किया, फाइनल असॉल्ट हमने किया, सब कुछ हमने किया. स्टोरी तुमको ग्रेनेडियर्स ने दी तो तुमने उस तरफ से छाप दी. तो आई सेड वो इन्फॉर्मेशन जहाँ से मिलेगी वहीं से तो करेंगे. बट Colonel Lalit Rai and his guys did a great job. Colonel Lalit Rai was commanding the Gurkhas.
The Gurkha Rifles doesn't need actually any mention. Their bravery is known to everyone.
Unparalleled valor and great valor. इसी तरह 3 पंजाब, जितनी पलटनों से मैं मिल पाया था ना, इतना बढ़िया एक्सेस जिन ने दिया.
But tell me the politicization story.
तो अब ये फ्रंट पेज पे छप गई खबर. अब पॉलिटिक्स इस पे शुरू हो जाती है. तो एक उत्तर प्रदेश के बड़े नेता हैं एक पॉलिटिकल पार्टी के, उन्होंने कहा कि जो जीत दिलाई थी कारगिल में वो बाकी सब भाग गए थे, आए तो केवल यही लोग थे, अल्लाह अकबर के नारों के साथ इन्होंने जीत दिलाई। तो उस पर लोगों ने बोला देखो इसीलिए what you should do was make sure your reports are all factual and are not misused by political leaders for political gains.
While your intention was just to give a different angle, and
just
also
facts.
it happened that way.
It happened that way. So, you know, the way I'm narrating that story to you is the way that those soldiers who fought and won. How would I get that story? They would come down for R&R, rest and recuperation. So when they're coming for rest and recuperation, some of them hadn't had a bath for like a month, right?
Yeah.
आप पहाड़ों में है, महीने भर से वही गर्म
No
कपड़ा,
shaving, no,
पहली बार आप इंडस नदी आपने देखी, मतलब बर्फीला पानी, लेकिन आपको फिर भी अच्छा लग रहा है, आप उसमें नहा रहे हैं। हाँ, अच्छा, वहीं से हम जा रहे थे, वहीं से उनसे मुलाकात हो गई, बैठ के बातें की, साथ खाना खाया, वहीं से ज्ञान ये सब मिला। उसी के आधार पर हम लोगों ने स्टोरी छापी, ब्रिगेड हेडक्वार्टर से क्रॉस चेक किया था। लेकिन इसी तरह लाइक टाइगर हिल का ऑपरेशन, आई वॉज देयर विद 8 सिख when they, you know, वो हेलमेट और इंडिया गेट की तरफ से, so these are those peaks के नाम वहाँ पर, and they suffered massive setbacks, लेकिन उन्होंने you know छोड़ा नहीं अपनी जगह। और उसी समय मेरे को वो याद हो गया जो उनकी वॉर क्राई होती है ना कि दे शिवा बर मोहे एहे शुभ कर मन से कपहू न डरूं वरी सोह जब जाए लड़ूं निश्चय कर अपनी जीत करूं। तो वो जोश भर देता है आप में। And you know, so you were asking me just a little before that कि क्या डिप्रेशन होता था या बुरा लगता था, मोरल डाउन होता था। मैंने युद्ध में पहली बार देखा कि जब 155 मिलीमीटर की तोप आई थी ना कारगिल में, तो ऑपरेशन में जाने से पहले जो आरटी, आई मीन यू नो रिलीजियस टीचर का कितना महत्व होता है एक पलटन में, किसी भी रेजिमेंट में, तो जब बोफोर्स की तोप आई तो बकायदा आरटी साहब नंगे पैर ठंड में वहाँ खड़े हैं, पूजा की, हवन हुआ, उसके बाद तिलक किया गया, बोफोर्स की तोप का तिलक किया गया, हर हथियार का तिलक, उस पर कलावा बांधा गया। हाँ, और आई थिंक दीज वर द राजरिफ गाइज, एंड जो बगल वाली पलटन का आरटी आया था, तो उसने वहाँ पर बकायदा गीता का उपदेश दिया, और वो उपदेश मेरे जीवन का एक तरह से सार बन गया कि हथोवा प्राप्यसी स्वर्गम जित्वा व भोक्षसी महिम तस्माद उत्तिष्ठ कौन्तेय युद्धाय कृत निश्चय। दैट when an RT, a religious teacher, is trying to fill his soldiers with josh, he tells them what Yogeshwar Shri Krishna told Arjun, that if you are killed in battle, you'll go to heaven, and if you win and you live, then you rule earth, which is as beautiful as heaven. So either way, victory is yours. So, O son of Kunti, take a firm resolve and fight to win. I mean, I had tears in my eyes when I was hearing that. I have tears in my eyes each time, you know, because I think of it as if I'm seeing this every day. Anytime I'm depressed, I actually go back to that story and then say, okay, dash on regardless.
It's something that can really fill you up with a lot of see, I think for someone who knows that they're going towards either certain death or victory.
Yep.
So you know, they would need a supercharging of this sort.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, why would a person, any sane person, go towards death? But these are men who have been trained for that, and that last moment of lighting the spark to get that training out, that is required. Now, let's talk about the end of the war. So, how did it happen? And what changed in the circumstances from the beginning of the war till the end of the war you were seeing, and then the war ended?
So towards the end of the war, so when all these battles, so you know, I'll tell you one thing about Musharraf and Pakistan. Musharraf was then army chief, and Kargil was his brainchild. He actually went and promised Srinagar to Nawaz Sharif. You know, he said, again, India's analysis ultimately, and I've spoken to a lot of army officers subsequently, they said he's a commando, he's a company commander who rose to become a general, and he became a general, but his mind remained that of a company commander. He could only think tactical, he could never think strategic. So he thought, ठीक है, tactical मैं ये post occupy कर लूँगा, Indian army ने जो सियाचिन में किया है मैं उसका बदला ले लूँगा, और then we'll negotiate, we'll get them to either get out of Siachen or we'll negotiate Kashmir, and that's the story he sold to Nawaz Sharif. Nawaz Sharif also said, "हाँ, Kashmir कब दिला रहे हो? Yeah, I'll go down in history as the man who got Kashmir from India after losing, they lost half of their country in '71." But none of them realized what would India do if you come into our territory. Indian Army used fighter planes. Pakistan never dreamed of it. Indian Army used heavy artillery. In fact, Sartaj Aziz came running to India on a bent knee. He said, "Boss, we'll talk everything. पहले आप Bofors बंद कराओ." And thank God Vajpayee didn't agree to that. Thank God they didn't agree to a ceasefire. That until everything was taken back. So when they lost Tiger Hill, when they lost the dominating positions on Drass and Batalik heights, and they realized that world opinion was not in favor. They kept saying Mujahideen, Mujahideen, terrorist, terrorist, terrorist. But world media was given access. The world media saw that these were Pakistan Army regulars. And they were dying there with no replenishment. So they sent in their troops. They could not sustain them. Because what has never been reported in greater detail, except a little in my book, was that our special forces went behind enemy lines and they cut off their supply chain.
So they were stranded.
They were stranded. Pakistan ke jawan mare gaye hain with namak and baraf in their mouth.
Did they even own them up?
No.
Never, no?
No. In fact, talk to General
So they're not
Joshi.
even martyrs on the book, in the book.
No, they were buried by the Indian Army. They were buried. So Indian Army flew in a Molvi. Ki, chalo, once you're dead, you're not a Pakistani soldier. Then you're just a dead body, right? So a Muslim dead body was buried. Pakistani soldiers were buried with full Islamic, rituals on those heights at 17,000 feet. So a Molvi had to be flown in because a Molvi can't climb those, that altitude. But then Pakistan lost the battle in the mind, and then Nawaz Sharif went running to America, to Clinton, and India was able to send that message across that we'll agree to a ceasefire, but you have to withdraw. You'll have to get back to pre-May position. And ultimately they did get back to that position, and then I think around 12th July or 13th July there was a ceasefire, mid-July, and 26th July India declared victory. And air operations and army operations, but mopping up operations continued even after that.
So these mopping up operations were not happening only in, let's say not mopping up exactly, because these would be there, but certain skirmishes continued in other places also. You were telling me something about Gujarat.
Which is the most fascinating part, and I want every Pakistani to know this, because this has never been said in as many words. Never. Pakistanis shot squad leader Ajay Ahuja. He bailed out. He was landing. As per the Geneva Convention, you can take him prisoner of war, but you can't shoot him in cold blood.
Yes.
You cannot do what they did to Saurabh Kalia and others.
You can't torture.
You can't torture soldiers. We didn't do that to their soldiers. But they did it. You can go and cry, in front of international bodies and the works, but enemy has to be taught a lesson. A Pakistani Navy aircraft, PNS Atlantic, it was a long-range maritime reconnaissance aircraft. It was flying very close to our borders, and it violated the border in Gujarat, and it came in. Air Chief, who later became Air Chief Marshal Krishna Swamy, was then Air Marshal Krishna Swamy, who was Southwest Air Command Chief, and Air Chief Marshal Tipnis was the Air Chief. Now these are command decisions that were taken in seconds. Their plane came in. India launched a MiG-21, flown by a very dear friend of mine called Squad Leader Bundela. And Squad Leader Bundela saw the Pakistani plane come into our territory. Ajay Ahuja is fresh in every air warrior's mind, every air warrior. And the enemy has to be told, boss, you kill us, we will give it back to you with interest.
Until then, Pakistanis thought that India never reacts.
Knee-jerk
reaction nahi hota. Yeah, they don't react only.
They think we don't react. So when Atlantic came in, this MiG-21 got him in the crosshairs, and he fired his R-73. He fired his rocket, and that rocket went and hit that Atlantic, and it really sank. That aircraft, it just fell to the ground, and I think, if I remember correctly offhand, some 20-25 of Pakistani sailors, on that long-range maritime reconnaissance aircraft, they were killed. The wreckage was on our side. Pakistan went to the international court.
But you had proof of the wreckage.
So we went to Nalia that same afternoon. We were in Delhi. A group of journalists were flown from Delhi to Nalia Air Base. And on 3 helicopters we were taken over the run of Kutch, just where the wreckage was. So, helicopter से ही हम wreckage को shoot कर रहे हैं, and the Pakistanis fired a stinger at that Mi-17, the first Mi-17, that helicopter I was
And
on
this
board.
was in the Indian territory.
This was in the Indian territory.
So they fired from their
From
territory into Indian airspace.
Yeah, but the pilot, brave, he saw, and he immediately took evasive measures. So I've not just seen those evasive measures, we felt it. Like that helicopter going like this, suddenly went like that and rushed back to the airbase. All the journalists, so there was CNN on board, there's NDTV, there's there's several other journalists, and we all landed back safely. Then we were told that that sudden maneuver was actually a stinger that was fired in your direction, and much later, a top Air Force officer told me that we shot down that Atlantic to tell the Pakistanis that if you shoot down Ajay Huja, then there are consequences for you. And that message Pakistan got.
That was not the only message Pakistan got. The victory sent out a very, very strong message to Pakistan, and I think 25 years later also, it rings very loud and clear.
So Pakistan's stupidity absolutely does, because this operation was nothing but a stupid mission which was not thought through. Unfortunately, most of Pakistan's actions are exactly like that. They don't think it through. They think India will not respond, because in their minds, वो हिंदू,
Pushovers. They think of India as pushovers.
वो हिंदू हैं, उनको लड़ना नहीं आता, वो वेजिटेरियन है, उनको ये नहीं आता, वो ये नहीं आता, उनको ये नहीं मालूम that if whatever little I've seen of the Indian Army from my birth and then from Kargil till date, I've reported on Pulwama, I've reported on Balakot, I've reported on Galwan. You can push India up to a point. Beyond a point, we are no saints. Beyond a point, Indian Army hits back and India hits back and hard.
You should never corner a tiger. That's basically, they should understand that. We're gonna, we've stretched this quite a bit, so I'll now wrap up. But it was a very interesting chat. We got to see moments of love, friendship, heated moments of courage, everything. I could literally imagine it in my mind. I hope you also enjoyed it, and thank you so much, Gaurav, for coming here. Gaurav Sawant, he was there, he saw the war, and he was lucky enough, or I don't know, I would call you lucky only, because for any journalist to get an opportunity like that, that's just amazing. And it's sort of, I think, that sort of steered you into that career, that zone of the war correspondent thing, and till date he is the war correspondent. He's been to all the war zones, and every time we see it, India Today is represented by him. Ashtak is also represented by him. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We would just like to remind you, we are posting videos about the Kargil war in the run up to the 25th anniversary, so keep watching that and subscribe to India Today Digital.